I'm Zach, and with me, as always, is Braden Holden. This week, we're going back to one of our usual top five topics. You've seen us do top five MMA fighters from Japan. So now we're just going to do the top five European fighters, MMA fighters across all promotions of all time, basically. So starting us off, we'll go Holden with number five.
Yeah, so my number five is the most dominant female strawweight champ in UFC history, Joanna Jędrzejczyk. She's incredible fighter. Her Muay Thai is absolutely insane. I feel like a lot of people used to underestimate her strength in there. She's still a pretty strong fighter. Um, she has incredible wars in the octagon. Went toe to toe with Shevchenko, has gone toe to toe with Zhang Weili, and what is debatably one of the greatest fights of all time. Um, there's so much good you can say about Joanna. Has defended the belt the most times, held it for the longest time at strawweight. I think she really helped build that division. So she's my number five.
So, what do you think, Braden?
Okay, so for the most part of my list, I have one person in each slot, but for number five, I did have a tie, and I'll explain why. So for number five, I have Conor McGregor and Alistair Overeem next to each other, and this is why. Okay, they're the complete opposite arguments to have on this list. Overeem did everything in the sport except for that one big moment in the UFC that he just kind of eluded him, and then Conor McGregor only had those big moments. Okay. And I see the argument for both of them not being on the list, but I also think that they're both so significant to the European fight culture that you got to make the argument that they should at least be mentioned somewhere on there, which is why I just had to put them both at the very bottom.
All right. For once, actually, I'm different than both of you. For number five, I picked Valentina Shevchenko. Definitely one of the most dominant female MMA athletes in the whole sport. I think she's been on a tear lately with the flyweights. She has various different title defenses, and I think she honestly just keeps getting better. So for number five, it's definitely going to be Valentina Shevchenko. Right. Moving on to number four, who do you have, Holden?
For number four, I also have Valentina Shevchenko. It was between her and Mirko Cro Cop, if I'm being honest for that one. Mirko, just to me, kind of was in that always the bridesmaid, never the bride situation, especially with Fedor and then moving on to other organizations. He was just never at the top there. And like Zach just said, Shevchenko, in my opinion, is the most complete martial artist on the roster today. She's her stand up is incredible. Any questions that we had about her strength and her grappling going into her fight with Jessica Andrade, she showed that not only can she win that fight at her range, and then she engaged in Andrade's style of fight. It was a very GSP-esque type of thing, and yeah, it looked awesome. And like Zach just said, most title defenses at flyweight. She's had two fights with Amanda Nunes. I kind of thought she won the second fight, but I think on multiple viewings since then, Nunes definitely took that fight, and she has a fight over my number five pick, Joanna Jędrzejczyk.
Yeah, I agree. My number four is also Valentina Shevchenko. I mean, what more can you say than what you just said? She's one of the most dominant fighters in history, not even just female fighters, but yeah, she's been on a tear and she's looked dominant doing it, and every time she's done it. So yeah.
All right. Number four for me, I actually did go ahead and pick Mirko Cro Cop. I think, like you said, he was definitely one of the best, but I don't think he never kind of got to like the spot of being the best, like somebody like Fedor. But I think he did have a great run in Pride. He retired on top. I think he was like undefeated in his last I think 10 fights. And I mean he has huge wins over the likes of Pat Barry, Hongman Choi, Josh Barnett, Vanderlei Silva, etc. So yeah, Mirko Cro Cop's number four for me. Moving on to number 3.
Yeah. My number 3 is Michael Bisping. I'm a big Michael Bisping fan.
Really?
I think I think he's one of those guys, kind of like Charles Oliveira. He had a long fight to the title, and he went through different stages of career, different stages of personalities. And fans really got to see him evolve over his career and make those changes and become a world class fighter and engage in these world class fights. And then it's almost poetic that he took a title fight on, 3 weeks notice, beats Luke Rockhold, gets the title, avenges that, posterized loss of his career. And then I thought when he fought GSP, early in that fight, he looked really good. There was a moment early in that fight, especially after round 1, where I thought Bisping had won round 1, and I was like, oh no, like this could be George St. Pierre might have came back and got a bit too much than he bargained for. So Bisping just has a storied career, one of those careers that will definitely go down in history. He's a UFC Hall of Famer. I don't know what more there is to say. The guy definitely kind of ticks all the marks on a greatest career list to me.
Go ahead, Ben.
Fair enough. My number 3 was Joanna Jędrzejczyk. I think we've already gone over this on one of your lists, Holden, right?
Yeah, mine.
It was on your list, yeah. Okay, yeah. I mean, I think maybe fans who are coming in now maybe can't remember it, but there was a time when she was the queen of her division and she looked unstoppable. It was like just nearing the end of Ronda Rousey's run, and like there was kind of like, oh, is there going to be as dominant a champion as Ronda Rousey? And Joanna comes in there and just decimates people. When she beat Penne in the fight night, it was insane. She absolutely demolished her for all those rounds and then finished her. Like, we'd never seen a female fighter look that scary before, if that makes sense. And I think Joanna was not only the first, but we still haven't really seen someone as like Shevchenko's dominant as hell, but she's not as terrifying as Joanna was. And I think being that kind of just terrifying reigning champion is very like culturally important for not only women's MMA, European MMA, but like she's just a very unique fighter in history, I think.
Cool. So for number 3, technically this guy wasn't born in Europe, but he literally moved there at a very, very young age, and he's been European ever since. He's also somebody who hasn't necessarily got to the UFC World Championship, but has a variety of different belts from different organizations, and that's just going to be Gegard Mousasi. So yeah, like I said, he hasn't necessarily won a UFC belt, but he has won belts in Bellator twice, Cage Warriors, Dream, Strikeforce, and he still continues to be one of the best middleweights, especially in the sport right now. Just continuing to fight the best of the best. Yeah, Gegard's mine. Move on to number 2.
Awesome. Yeah, Gegard's a good one. I didn't put him on my list. But yeah, Gegard's a really good one. And debatably one of the only guys in the world that you can think of that could go toe to toe with Israel Adesanya right now. So yeah, that's a really good pick, Zach. Number 2 for me, I know we've had a few arguments about this fighter, especially with the heavyweight division, but I think on a European list, it's pretty unanimous that he's got to be number 1 or number 2. Fedor Emelianenko, dominant at heavyweight, undefeated for 10 years. What more can you say? The guy was beating, like we have said multiple times, the guy was beating guys roided out of their minds, and he's never tested positive for roids. So who's to say that he ever did them? So yeah, he beat some incredible names. He beat Dan Henderson. He beat Mirko Krokop. He's beat he's beat the Nogueira brothers. He's beat Mark Coleman. And these aren't just fights where it was kind of like, oh, it could have gone either way. These are guys that were that were either dominant champions or just looked like scary guys or came from UFC and everything like that. And they're like, oh, these are the best guys in the world. And Fedor went out there and, you know, he would go into other people's realms, just like kind of Shevchenko would go into other people's realms and make it look easy. Yeah, I mean, what else can you say? Storied career, 10-year unbeaten streak. He's kind of fallen off as late, which kind of happens with some of the older MMA guys. They get to near the end of their career and they kind of don't know when to call it quits. But when you're a guy like Fedor with as much dominance as he has, it's almost justifiable.
I 100% agree, and my number 2 is also Fedor Emelianenko. I mean, you said it all, right? He's beating guys who were on roids, because that's what, you know, pride allowed. So even if he was on roids, it wasn't really cheating. But either way, dominant for 10 years, that in itself is insane. And like you said, he may be kind of falling off in performance right now, but he's still relevant, which is kind of insane. He's fighting people who are from his era, who are also kind of past their prime. But you know, it's a storybook ending for a legendary career that's already happened. You know, you can't judge him off of the fact that he lost the Bellator heavyweight title fight to Bader, right? Like he's still beating people like Mir, he's beating people like Rampage, and that's what you can expect from him from now. And I think it's great that we get to even see Fedor compete right now. But again, just going back to his actual career, there hasn't been a heavyweight that's been as dominant as him since, right? And you know, every once in a while, we get these fighters who look like they're competing in 2 weight classes below against someone in the actual weight class. You got Muhammad Ali, who moved around like a welterweight when he was a heavyweight, and I think he was something similar with Fedor Emelianenko when he was in Pride. He was a heavyweight, but he was so fast and dynamic that his movement looked like he was a middleweight, and he was just a step ahead of all these slower, stiffer fighters, and he could bring the fight anywhere he wanted to. He could out grapple you. He was armbarring giants from the bottom, and then he was also striking with Krokop and all these great strikers in Pride. I think he was one of the first big complete packages, who was also a massive talent that we'd never seen before.
Yeah, he was definitely way ahead of his time in terms of skill set. In terms of skill set and ability, he was really one of the first ever complete dominant fighters, and laid the groundwork for other guys.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I kind of had a feeling before starting this that we would probably have a lot of agreement on the first and second spot. Second spot for me is obviously Fedor as well. I don't even know what I could add to both of you because you guys basically said it all. But before we get to number 1, which I'm sure everybody knows who it is, I just wanted to go over a few honorable mentions. Maybe just one from each of you. Starting off, I gotta say Jan Blachowicz. Definitely could be up there he could be on this top 5 list one day, depending on how much he does in the light heavyweight division. I mean, you take a guy who almost was being cut. He wasn't winning often. He moves up to light heavyweight and he becomes an absolute animal. I think he deserves definitely to be mentioned in the talks of the top European MMA fighters for sure. You guys have any honorable mentions?
For me, a guy that almost made my list, that was kind of a last minute cross out, was Alexander Gustafsson. That was a guy that, you know, at light heavyweight when John Jones looked dominant, he was really John Jones' first debatable loss. And there's still a lot of people that think, in what an incredible fight that was, there's still a fair amount of people that think that Alexander Gustafsson won that fight. Alexander Gustafsson has looked great. He's looked great his entire career. And there was kind of this lull with, I don't want to sound rude to European fans or European fighters, but there was this lull where there wasn't as much European talent in there. And I thought Alexander Gustafsson for a while, and it was like kind of between Gustafsson and Bisping that were controlling all the European hopes, and they would go to Sweden and be able to sell out crowds just basically on the back of Alexander Gustafsson, right? So I think he's not only a pretty marketable guy, but also just one of the greatest light heavyweights to not win a belt in UFC history.
And I think he is trying to go for that second run too. He does have that fight coming up with Paul Craig, so we'll see how that goes.
That's scary.
Now that John Jones is gone, I mean, who knows? But I'm not sure. I guess Paul Craig could be on this list one day as well. Maybe.
Yeah.
He's been looking crazy lately. I think he's very underrated. Every fight he goes into, he's underrated, I think. But I guess we'll have to see.
Yeah, that's what I was gonna say. We have all these young up and coming European fighters right now. Sorry, I shouldn't really say young, but like we have a big influx of European talent that's rising through the ranks right now. You got Paul Craig, you got a lot of new Russian fighters entering the UFC recently. And in a few years' time, this list would, I think, look very different, or at the very least, be a lot more competitive to try to create. I think the closest to my list have already been mentioned. The guys who would probably be like 6, 7, 8, like just under the 5. Bisping 100% was in contention to be on there, even though he didn't make it. And Mousasi was a very, very good one. I might have to rethink and put Mousasi at my number 5 instead of Overeem and McGregor.
It kind of scared me for a second when I was looking at him because it said born in Iran, and I was like, oh. But then I realized he was Dutch.
I gotta say, I do really like your quote that he moved to Europe and he was European ever since.
Hey man, there's no lies.
Very good observation.
I'd like to say I'm not a really big Conor McGregor fan, as you know, but that conflict, that rivalry between Conor and Khabib just did so much for European MMA. And like Brayden said, like you got a lot of these young European fighters coming up now because the UFC is more willing to look at that European talent, because you had 2 European guys that could, market the biggest card in the world, right? Like I think, like Brandon said, European talent is just on the rise. And though I'm not a big fan of Conor McGregor, what he did in the UFC elevated the European prospect pool, and we should definitely be grateful for that. And then, yeah,
cool. I think it'd be very hard to try to convince anyone that McGregor is one of like the best, like straight fighters in European history. But I think on terms of like, if you're saying greatest of all time or best in terms of fighting plus like legacy and career, then you got to kind of take into account the fact that, say, like you just said, he opened up, the European market to MMA in a way that hadn't been opened up before. And then he also, they were few and far between because he doesn't have the greatest record and he didn't defend championships and stuff. But he had very singular, massive moments in his career that did change the game of MMA in certain ways, being double champ, breaking pay-per-views and that sort of thing.
If you have the ability and the marketability just to capture the world and always stay in the conversation, that's greatness in itself. I would never put him on any great fighter list, and not even a great champion list. But when you look at like greatness and a guy that elevated the sport, even though I think some bad has come out of what he's brought to the sport, when you look at a guy that's brought new fans to the sport, brought new money to the sport, and brought so much to the sport in terms of prospects, Conor McGregor is definitely an honorable mention on that list for me. And I know you just you had him on your list, but yeah, in terms of that, he does have a legacy of greatness.
Yeah, I agree with that. So with that, we'll move on to number 1. Obviously, I'm pretty sure we all have the same one, but Holden, you can take it away.
I don't want to say too much because obviously you guys are probably going to have your own things to say. But when you have a guy that's undefeated in a sport as unpredictable as MMA, it's got to be him. And Khabib Nurmagomedov is just this well-rounded, dominant fighter. You got a guy that dropped McGregor on the feet. You got a guy that dominated people. You got a guy that was and he was scary. They post those social media things, and he's scary. He's dominant. I deserve this. He had an unbreakable mindset. The only thing that stops him from fighting is his mom asking him to stop after his father passed away. Like, he is, when I think of a martial artist, he is everything that encapsulates what a martial artist should be. And he's number one on my list for sure.
Go ahead, Brad.
Yep. I think you're right. Hasbullah is my number one.
Oh.
No, yeah. It has to be Khabib. There's no argument, right? It has to be Khabib. And time after time, and I've heard people make the argument like, hey, he had a fairly padded career, like very, very prior to the UFC when he first started. But by the time you get to the UFC, he dominated Dustin Poirier, and they're like, okay, well, do it again. Dominates Conor McGregor. Okay, do it again. He dominates Gaethje. The fact that he ended his career with basically the other three best lightweights in the world, and in dominant fashion, barely losing a round, arguably not losing a round at all. In my opinion, he didn't. But obviously, on the judges' scorecards, he lost a couple there. One against Gaethje, one against McGregor. But judges gave 30-27 Khabib. So, interesting conversation, but a separate conversation.
For sure.
You can't argue with the dominance. Nobody's even come close to 29-0, and nobody, even harder, who's going to come close to 29-0 without losing a round? It's unthinkable almost.
Yeah, I think the only person that, I guess not even the round thing, but I think the only person who could have a chance at the moment to get where Khabib is probably Makhachev, but still, he
has a loss on his record already, though.
That's what I mean. Like, without the loss, getting as close to Khabib as you possibly can at the moment. I'm sure there will be guys down in the future that maybe get there, but as of right now, definitely Khabib's one of the best, is the best. There's no really debating it whatsoever, right? And not even just dominance in fighting. I mean, like we mentioned earlier, the marketability of him, he kind of opened up Russia. Now you see way more fighters, especially just from his hometown of Dagestan, and then just all over Russia, all over Europe in general, right? So I think it's just undeniable, Khabib's the best. So yeah.
Best European. Let's make sure we say that.
Anyways,
I think he is the only one on this list who's in the argument for all time, though.
Yeah.
Oh,
yeah.
For sure.
Yeah. All right, we'll wrap it up there. This one wasn't as long as usual, but I don't know. The top 5 ones we'll kind of keep it a little shorter, just so we kind of put them out more often. So hope you guys enjoyed. Let us know what you think in the comments. See you later.